Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, InaneDragon, and tonight, Deflating Atheism will explain to us how arguments about a literal interpretation of Genesis just aren't all that important. Of course, he'll kind of get lost wandering off into a discussion about the argument from fine-tuning, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Deflating, you have the floor.
Christians and atheists spend a lot of time mired in red herring arguments. They're red herrings because no matter which way the argument is decided, it wouldn't make any difference to anyone's justifications for atheism or theism.
And you're already not even wrong. Sometimes the argument isn't about whether or not some God exists. Sometimes the argument is about whether or not a particular God exists, such as, say, one that created the universe 6,000 years ago. Or the argument is about whether or not we introduce junk like creationism and intelligent design into the classroom, or take out very real science such as physics, or biology, or geology, which would contradict the religious beliefs of certain individuals from classrooms. Because quite frankly, that's a little bit more important than whether or not this Thomisian argument or that Thomisian argument has been debunked for the 15,000th time. It's really just not always about you, Deflating Atheism.
For example, a certain brand of Christian and a certain brand of atheist spend enormous amounts of time debating a literal reading of Genesis as if it were hugely consequential to the issue of whether or not God exists. But it's not. Even if it can be established that the Earth is only 6,000 years old, and all the creatures of the Earth appeared fully formed shortly afterwards, it wouldn't change the terms of the debate at all, since, according to atheists, God is never a rational inference, and inferring a creator from a 6,000-year-old Earth would be just another God of the Gaps argument.
Actually, if we could demonstrate that the models of physics and biology and geology all still worked, were consistent with every bit of evidence that we have, except for the age of the Earth and its biosphere, or except for the universe's age, then we'd have a problem, because physics would break down, biology would break down, geology would break down, all of our knowledge of science would effectively be limited to what could be explained recently, and something weird as fuck happened. That is to say, something perhaps supernatural happened 6,000, 10,000 years ago. This would be excellent evidence for a god, unlike a Thomistic argument, for example. So this is actually not a God of the Gaps argument, because a God of the Gaps argument is when you have a situation which might be explainable naturalistically through the scientific method, where we might close the gap in knowledge. And yet you posit God anyways, even though you know that it's just a question of when we have an answer, not whether or not there possibly ever could be an answer. You have to falsify the naturalistic answers before you posit God. That's a God of the Gaps argument. So, again, you're not even wrong.
But if it's some hugely improbable occurrence crying out for a designer we want, we don't need to hang our hats on the 6,000-year-old Earth, since something vastly more improbable has already happened, and what's more, it's something we could observe in the here and now.
Oh, damn it. You're going to argue that the outcome of a purely naturalistic theory, that a model that requires no supernatural causation has a supernatural cause. You realize this is something of a total non sequitur. Look, Ma, the predictions of general relativity produce a Big Bang and a universe that can form without needing any kind of supernatural cause whatsoever. Oh, golly, Bubble, that must mean that a supernatural entity exists despite not being required in any way, shape, or form to explain the observations that we done got here in this reality. Do you not see how stupid this argument is? You're saying that, look, a universe exists that can be explained naturalistically without resorting to supernatural causations. So there must be a supernatural cause, right?
14 billion years ago, our universe came into being, observing a fixed set of laws elegantly described by mathematics and intelligible to our reason. These laws were bound by a set of constants so finely tuned that to alter any one of them to the slightest degree would result in a universe that either pulls apart instantly in a big rip, or collapses in on itself instantly in a big crunch.
Yup, you went there. You're arguing that the so-called finely tuned constants of the universe are evidence for God because of, how precisely tuned they are, even though that's in part an artifact of, the units that we chose to use, and the fact that they're ratios, so they're going to be precise, at least as precise as our measurements of the things we're making ratios of. That's not evidence of tuning, that's evidence of measuring and definitions. But there are dozens of very, very good arguments against fine-tuning as an argument for God. And I've linked several of them below because, let's be honest, there's only so many times you can pick apart a bad argument. But I'm do it here with one that comes up less often. It's not original to me, even though I came up with mine independently of others, which tells you just how fucking obvious this should be. See, fine-tuning is not an argument for God, it's an argument for naturalism. Fine-tuning is a requirement for any universe which has living beings in it. The fine-tuning that you're talking about anyways. Therefore, if we exist to observe the universe and no gods exist, it must be a universe which can support our life. That is to say, it must be a universe where the constants underlying reality are such that galaxies form, solar systems form, planets form, and complex biology can kick off. It's a requirement. You must have it. Therefore, it is a strong probability under the hypothesis of naturalism. Whereas, if you have a god, any universe is possible. He's going to sustain life in it. He could make it so that the cosmological constant was infinity. Because he's God, he can do that. And given that we are talking about the biblical God in your case, and he talks about how the reality is evidence of his existence, we would expect a universe that is not finely tuned for life from this God. Why? Because that would make it more miraculous, that would make it more wonderful, that would make reality testify to his existence. So, finely tuned doesn't make sense under the Christian God, and under any God, it doesn't make any more sense than any other universe. So it's superfluous to the hypothesis of a God, whereas it's necessary to the hypothesis of naturalism. Therefore, if we find the universe to have some evidence of fine-tuning, that is evidence for naturalism. Once more, you're not even wrong.
Just one of these constants, the cosmological constant, is finely tuned to a degree of 1 in 10 to the 120th power. It's the reciprocal of a number greater than the number of atoms in a universe, multiplied by the number of seconds since the Big Bang, squared.
We actually don't know just how much any of these constants could be varied. We also don't know if varying one would result in others changing to compensate. This is all part of those arguments that I linked down below if you want to get into the details. But here's the thing. The cosmological constant is actually, possibly not finely tuned in the means which you need it to be for it to be evidence for a God. You see, under naturalism, finely tuned just needs to be good enough for us to exist. With a perfect, all-powerful God, finely tuned should be perfect. And the cosmological constant is positive. Were it slightly negative, then we would have more galaxies forming, which would cause more star systems to form, which would cause more opportunities for advanced life to form. Therefore, if it's finely tuned for the existence of life under the theistic proposition, then we would expect it to maximize the possibility of life to exist and for it to form, which would require that negative value. But as I've already mentioned, it's positive, which reduces the possibility for life. So you're not even wrong because your argument's been invalidated under your own terms. I'm sorry, Deflating, but you are deflating.
and that's just one finely tuned constant of many. Now, according to atheists, or at least the honest ones, these constants are finely tuned for no particular reason at all, in physical laws that are mathematically describable and intelligible for no particular reason at all, governing a universe that exists for no particular reason at all. That's a scenario that truly beggars all belief.
First of all, why do things require reasons for existence? Your particular formulation begs the question. You assume that things have reason, and then, therefore, you demand that we provide reasons for you, and yet you cannot show that reasons are a requirement for anything. That being said, saying that atheists say that all of this is for no particular reason at all is an insanely naive or extremely asinine straw man. See, most atheists can explain to you quite readily that the universe is describable by mathematics, reason, and laws of physics, because mathematics, reason, and laws of physics were developed with the sole purpose of describing the universe. You have reversed cause and effect. So you're not even wrong again. Worse still, mechanistic descriptions of how the universe works is again better evidence for naturalism than theism, just like with fine-tuning. If there is a God, then he can make any world that he wants. If there isn't a God, the universe must be one which is compatible with our existence, since we do in fact exist. Without any gods, this necessarily must be a universe that operates in a comprehensible manner, since otherwise humans, that is, beings that comprehend their surroundings, would not survive. It's just a nice addendum for the universe to be comprehensible if there are gods, not a requirement. So, point naturalism.
Now, of course, atheists will accuse me of making a God of the gaps argument, but the point is not that science can't explain these things, but rather that the existence of a creator and designer of the universe can explain these things.
First of all, you'll notice that I explained exactly how your argument doesn't work without once resorting to the God of the Gaps issue, which is silly because, as you've just admitted, this is a perfect example of the God of the Gaps fallacy. By your own admission, science may well provide completely naturalistic solutions to these questions. From watching your other videos, I know for a fact that you do know that some of these naturalistic solutions have already been formulated as hypotheses, which you have failed to disprove, which is a prerequisite to substituting a supernatural argument. And by your own admission, again, in spite of the existence of the possibility to answer these questions that you've raised naturalistically, you choose to demand that this gap in current knowledge be filled with God. That is, as I stated earlier in this video, the very definition of a God of the Gaps argument. Congratulations! You're not even wrong when attempting to dodge a counter-argument that isn't even necessary to demonstrate how you're not even wrong about fine-tuning. You should consider studying the topic seriously instead of just from the perspective of attempting to prove your preferred preconceptions correct. It might enlighten you to a far wider world than the petty god of your Bible. I'm InaneDragon, wishing you all a good night. Before you go, don't forget to do the whole ratey, commenty, subscribey thing. You know the drill. And of course, for those who really want to blow their money and just hate to have it in their wallet instead, consider supporting me on Patreon. That's how I actually get to have nice headphones and new equipment to make all of this a little bit less shitty for you all. Once again, thank you. Have a good night.